At the tender age of 7, I started my very first business. No, it wasn't planting flowers and selling them. No, in typical 7-year-old fashion, it was not collecting bugs and selling them on the playground. No, no, no. I had something much more refined, much more craftsmanlike, much more beautiful. Folding paper airplanes. And being a 7-year-old and being around 7-year-olds, there's nothing they love more than throwing a piece of paper through the air to see it fly about 10 feet and then hit the ground. Anyway, the sales were skyrocketing, and I was selling them for marbles, for candy, anything they could give me for this paper airplane. And the issue was, I got way too many orders. Almost everybody in the class ordered 1 or even 2 or even 3 in some devoted fans' cases. And as a result, I got completely swamped, and I only ended up making 2 before I had my very first breakdown in that class and deciding that I was shutting off the business for everything. Now, this leads into today's proverb: who begins too much accomplishes little. I took on way too much, way too fast, and in the end I accomplished almost nothing. And from this quote, we can learn that to achieve the prosperity in life that we desire, we can't overextend ourselves. We need to find a place where we feel comfortable with what we're doing and where we feel like we can be successful. So we'll first see this through a musician, then through a famous general, before finally looking at a business. Sufjan Stevens is most known as one of the most devoted and most talented indie artists of our time, to say the least. In the hearts of many, he's one of the few last raw musicians that's putting real passion into his work, with albums like Michigan, Illinois, Seven Swans, and Carrie and Lowell being all considered classics in the eyes of many, and like me, people listening to them from the moment they wake up to the moment they go to sleep. But Sufjan Stevens had one big issue: his 50 States project. You see, as I mentioned earlier, his albums Illinois and Michigan were supposed to be the very first 2 projects in this 50-state series. He wanted to write an album for every single state in the United States, all 50 of them, including Alaska and Hawaii. But the issue is, this was just way too many albums. We're talking full-length, hour-and-a-half albums here, and 50 is almost more than most artists will have in their entire lifetimes, in their entire careers. Nevertheless, it's a small side project away from everything else. The issue is, he completely overextended himself and only made Michigan and Illinois. He only made 2 out of 50, which is only 4% of what he really wanted to accomplish. And as a result, a lot of people were frustrated. For example, people from Arkansas being so sad that Sufjan Stevens never wrote a ballad about them. From Sufjan Stevens, we can learn that even if our goals seem to be just completely in our reach, it seems like something we can do, we need to look at them from an outside objective perspective and realize that sometimes, like his 50 States project or my small business, sometimes we just truly cannot accomplish them in a way that we will find satisfactory. So we need to look at our goals realistically and realize if we're overextending ourselves, to rein in a little bit. Now, somebody that never reined in until his very end, Napoleon Bonaparte. Known as one of the greatest and worst generals and leaders of all time, he was a French general and politician that led his forces to many successes, but lots of big failures as well. The issue is, Napoleon loved to overextend himself, and by extension his military, his people, and his country of France as a whole. You see, one victory was never enough. He always wanted one more. He always wanted more victory, more success, more power. And this led to his eventual downfall and the failure of France as a country during his era. You see, let's take for example the battle at Waterloo. In 1815, he was finally defeated at Waterloo, like the ABBA song says, that we all know so very well from Mamma Mia. And basically, his forces eventually left him because they decided that he was trying too much. He was overextending them. He was overextending them, and ultimately they didn't want to deal with it anymore. And as a whole, Napoleon's overextension didn't just hurt himself or his military, but France as a whole. You see, when a country like France is attacking literally all of its neighbors, England, Spain, Germany, Russia, everybody, in turn, everybody hates you and nobody wants to do any trade with you whatsoever. So ultimately, his people ended up starving and angry at him and eventually led to being exiled because of his failures. From Napoleon, we need to learn that we can't overextend ourselves in the way that we think we can. He thought he could do it all, but ultimately he couldn't. So we need to learn from Napoleon that even if it seems like we can do everything, we need to talk to people that trust us and people that we trust in order to really find out what's happening and what we can really truly achieve. And even if we have success after success, we need to realize that eventually we're going to fail, and we need to be ready for that. We can't just be ready for the success, but we also need to realize that we can't overextend ourselves to the point of failure without, like I said, failing. Now, from France back to the United States with the camera company Kodak. Now known as a relic of an era bygone of film photography, it wasn't always this way. At the time, it started as one of the leading manufacturers of film and patented many processes and chemicals that are still used with film photography today in this day and age. So, what happened with Kodak? 2 words: digital photography. Because of digital photography, film sales went down so quickly because people realized that a digital photo was so much easier than taking a picture on a roll of film, taking it in to get developed, waiting a week or 2 to get it developed, and finally seeing if your picture was even good. The thing is, Kodak didn't even try to extend themselves a little on the opposite end. They didn't try to overextend themselves. They didn't even try to extend themselves at all. I'll explain. In 1975, one of their engineers invented the very first digital camera. That's right, in 1975, not the early 2000s like many people believe. But the issue was, Kodak saw absolutely no value in this invention. They didn't believe that it had any purpose in the modern world, and they thought they could just stay with film photography forever. And ultimately, this led to their failure as a company. While they do exist today, they're no longer the photography giants that they were in an era bygone. If they had extended themselves just a little bit to see this new advent of digital photography, they could have been the very first people on the scene and might have been the most popular camera company in the world after it. So from Kodak, we need to learn that we can't overextend ourselves, but we can't underextend ourselves either. We need to see the value in our ideas, and if it seems like it might be worth pursuing even a little bit, we need to look into pursuing it even if it doesn't quite seem like it might be successful. We can't just be content with ourselves. We need to extend a little bit without extending ourselves so much to the point of failure. So overall, we can learn from Kodak that while overextending ourselves is bad, we also can't underextend ourselves. We need to find the sweet spot that we feel we can truly find success and we can truly find our own happiness. So today we talked about the proverb, who begins too much accomplishes little. And this means that to achieve prosperity in our lives, to achieve the success that we desire, what we feel is truly successful, we can't overextend ourselves. We need to find a sweet spot where we're extending ourselves enough to be successful without enough to be failing. So we first saw through Sufjan Stevens and how he overextended himself with his 50 States album project and how ultimately this led to his failure in that way. Then Napoleon, who was a historical overextender, and that led to his downfall, before finally looking at Kodak and how they didn't extend themselves nearly enough to be successful. So overall, we can learn that in our lives, we need to find the sweet spot of extension and find a way that we can be successful in our own hearts and own minds.